Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We got a packed house on a very, very hot summer day in New York City.
Yeah, thank you all for making the trip over to Pier 57. We're very proud of this space, but we also realize it's really hot out in the middle of the summer. So thank you for making the time.
So we're so excited to have everybody here today. We've got a number of speakers from our Google Cloud team, a number of speakers from our partner ecosystem. By way of introduction, my name's Dominique Nizio. Most people call me Dom. I'm part of our Google Cloud partner ecosystem team, and I have the pleasure of looking after the relationships with a number of data providers, many of whom you will be hearing from later today.
And I'm Peter Leonard. I'm the Director of Customer Engineering here in New York. So as you work with the Google team and there start being real questions about technology, you're probably speaking to one of us.
Peter's our partner in crime.
Absolutely.
All right, so we have a packed agenda. In a couple of minutes, I'll hand it over to Stephen Orban for our opening keynote, and then we'll make our way through some technical content, some use cases, and then we'll have a number of our partners come to the stage. We expect there to be a lot of content today, so we will leave some room for questions, but we do have the pre-function area available during the break, so feel free to grab any of our partner speakers if you have questions throughout the day.
And on top of that, just before we get to speakers, for the data providers in the room, we want to do many more really interesting and differentiated things with our shared customers. And today is really about giving you some ideas and some thoughts to take home and think about what we do next. For the customers in the room, for those of you who buy data, well, these ideas also apply to your own internal organizations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. For any of the systems integrators in the room, we want to put you all to work. For the Googlers in the room, there are a lot of people who have RSVP'd. We might have to ask you to step out. Let's see how it goes. So.
All right, so a big thank you to all of our speakers. A couple of quick housekeeping items. Bathrooms are located outside where you came in to the right. We will have coffee, tea, refreshments outside throughout the day, so feel free to kind of pop out there if you need a quick refresher. And then there are hospitality agents, myself, Peter, and a number of other Googlers that are here throughout the day if you have questions. And without further ado, I'll welcome up Stephen.
Thank you, Don. New York City. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We know that all of you have very important jobs leading either customer engineering or engineering in your organization or partnerships and driving data license business. Many of you have families. There's lots of things that you could probably be doing on a beautiful summer day here in New York, but the fact that you'd spend a day with us learning how we can grow and transform together is not lost on us. We don't take it for granted. We're very grateful that you could be here. Dom mentioned and Peter mentioned what we have in store for the day, but this is the first time we're doing this event, this data provider event here in New York. So we think we have a pretty cool agenda to give you some inspiration on ideas for how we can grow, how your data gets utilized by customers and how our customers can use it. But we certainly want your feedback. Again, we're really grateful that everybody's here, but we want to be able to learn from one another. So that's us learning from you and potentially you learning from each other and networking as well. So keep continuing to give us the feedback. I know many of you are ready, but for those I haven't met, my name is Stephen Orban. I consider myself a very lucky guy. I have a wife I've been married to for 17 years. We have two wonderful daughters. They're 15 and 12. Sometimes I feel like they're going on 29 and 25. But I also have the good fortune of looking after the ISV ecosystem, the data provider partnerships, and the marketplace business here at Google Cloud, where I've been for about 2 years. So I'm still relatively new to Google in the grand scheme of things, but I'm not new to the cloud and I'm not new to data licensing. I started my career about 25 years ago at Bloomberg as a software engineer, building cloud-based data and analytics and data licensing capabilities for financial services professionals. Then we did some stuff in sports, in media as well, where I got a PhD in data sharing. And then I spent a couple years as the CIO of Dow Jones, where we led a significant cloud-based transformation that completely changed the way we did business. Before I spent the last 8 years at AWS in a variety of roles, including building their migration program, starting and managing their data exchange, where I probably had the opportunity to work with many of you, before leading their ISV and marketplace business as well. And over the last decade or so, working very closely in the public cloud, one thing became very clear to me, particularly over the last couple of years. Moving to the cloud is now table stakes. Every big enterprise in government has in some way, shape, or form moving to the cloud, and how they get there is no longer the secret sauce. It's really what customers are going to do when they get there that is going to continue to make them different and unique and competitive. And we believe, that when customers get there, it's the analytics and now the generative AI that's really going to set them apart with what they're doing with their cloud journey. And I joined Google because it became very clear to me that nobody is better positioned to help customers leverage analytics AI in the cloud than Google. Now, I would be lying if I said I predicted this when I joined Google 2 years ago, but we do believe that Gen AI is going to transform just about everything. What was the over-under on how long it would take for us to mention Gen AI throughout the course of the day? Did anybody have the under? Let's see. Anyway, so we're seeing Gen AI transform just about everything. How developers write code, how analysts build business cases, how advertisers create ads, how human resources professionals build job descriptions, how enterprise search their content, and a lot more. Now, I personally believe that this sort of transformation is going to happen a lot faster than cloud transformed traditional enterprise IT. Largely because cloud, if you think about it 10 years ago, still continues to be a CIO level and driven agenda. Whereas what we're seeing with Gen AI is now being driven from the CEOs and the boardrooms that's really kind of accelerating their change. And there is simply no shortcut for experience. And we've been transforming how we build products and how we go to market through our partner ecosystem with an effort to have what we think is the most open Gen AI ecosystem on earth at every single layer of the stack since we invented the transformer model back in 2017, which is basically the underpinning of all of the new Gen AI large language models that you see today. At the lowest level, we have our own TPUs as well as GPUs from NVIDIA, and AI toolkits from them as well. We've got over 120 different models in our model garden, some of our own, but of course, commercial models from Cohere, AI21, Anthropic, Mistral, and others. JetBrains and GitLab are building Gen AI capabilities into their IDEs so they can meet developers where they are. MongoDB, Pinecone, Elastic, Glean are building and integrating their database and search systems with our stack to help developers build AI applications. And then if you think about the higher level applications like Salesforce, Workday, and SAP, weaving AI into everything they're doing. But all of our customers need data to make their AI useful. Rarely are we seeing a customer have everything that they already need to have to make their models and Gen AI projects as useful and as active as they can. So we're already working with many of you here. You're going to hear from some of our partners already. London Stock Exchange, TransUnion, Dun & Bradstreet, Moody, Shutterstock, CoreLogic, Bloomberg, Rearc, and lots of others. And we think all of you in this room, the ones with the private corpuses of private intellectual property that you can't get freely available on the internet to train existing models, we think you are all going to be the big winners in the Gen AI movement as customers are trying to build and make their models smarter. You have all the data that our mutual customers turn to be differentiated and successful with generative AI. Whether it be to help them fine-tune a model for their own purposes, or it could just be simply helping them ground a model and an experience with facts as part of a retrieval augmented generation to avoid hallucinations. We feel we have such a huge opportunity to partner together to seize the moment and help our customers transform faster. And at the center of this, from our perspective, is our BigQuery service. Now, like I said before, I joined Google because I felt that nobody is better positioned with analytics and AI capabilities. And BigQuery is just a fundamentally different tool on how we approached analytics in the cloud. So Google prides itself, one of our missions is to really solve computer science's hardest problems. And when you think about this, more than a decade ago, that mission led to the distributed computing and file sharding capabilities that Google had to build really out of necessity to power search and YouTube and several of our other billion user products. So several years ago, some really smart Googlers realized that if we combined these capabilities into a service that brought together storage, compute, and analytics all into one layer, we might just have a fundamentally different approach to cloud-based analytics solutions. Now, while everything that you're going to find anywhere else as it relates to analytics really relies on virtual machines under the hood, whether it's another cloud provider service or any of the other software companies that you'll find who are building analytics tools, they're all relying on cloud-based virtual machines under the hood. That means that it's constrained by the price per performance that they're able to get from those virtual machines. Whereas we took a fundamentally different approach by vertically integrating BigQuery and the price per performance characteristics that customers simply can't get anywhere else. This is the reason that we're seeing lots of our mutual customers turn to it as a tool for their data and analytics warehouses and tool of choice. Folks like Goldman Sachs, Walmart, Home Depot, and the Mayo Clinic really favoring Google for their analytics capabilities. And over the years, we've continued to add more than just analytics capabilities to it. Customers have access to differentiated AI infrastructure under the hood, some of which I just talked about. More than 130 foundational models in our model garden. Many ways to store structured and unstructured data, hopefully, much of which is going to continue to be hydrated and powered by all of you. And many different ways to reason about this data, whether it be a SQL interface, Spark, Python, or remote functions, and then all wrapped up in one seamless, unified user experience for customers to use. And it's this approach that's really afforded us a different way to think about data sharing. So rather than have to copy the data around or manage a bunch of different cluster sizes and nuances and have to scale things up and down manually, which are all unfortunate downsides of the data exchange that I had the privilege maybe of building at another cloud provider, maybe I'm using now to correct a lot of the mistakes that we made in years past. Our Analytics Hub capability in BigQuery allows customers to share and exchange data without having to copy it and analyze it right in place using tools they're already familiar with as if it's their own data. So think about this for a second. Our mutual customers who are using data that's their own, maybe some from us or public data sets, or maybe some from many of you in the room, they don't have to move any of the data. There's nothing to set up, and they can co-locate it just alongside their same first-party data. Huge difference into how anything else that we're aware of works as it relates to customers sharing data with one another. Who here, for example, let's just do a quick show of hands, is still shipping hard drives to customers? Anybody? I know there's some of you in the room. So maybe you're just too embarrassed to raise your hand. I know it's still happening. Nobody wants to raise their hand. Who's still managing FTP sites where they have a bunch of credentials and systems and they have to post it in there? Both of these methods require a ton of work for you and for your customers. How many times are you answering support cases about some FTP credential got lost, or they're worried that the newest file isn't there? Even when you start to think about APIs, which I think we could probably agree in the last 5 to 6 years is the most modern way to do data distribution, it's still a ton of work. You have to manage API keys and credentials. Customers have to poll things constantly to know when there's new data that's going to be updated. They have all that stuff to manage. Then they have to copy it somewhere else if they're going to store it in their own system to analyze it in real time. Just a lot of work, a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting that makes it very difficult for you and your customers to do what they actually want to do, which is to actually analyze this data. So our approach is to give customers just a fundamentally different way to do this, where they basically have a pointer to all the data that they have in BigQuery, whether it's their own data or third-party data that they subscribe to with all of you in Analytics Hub. And frankly, it's pretty indistinguishable from magic from my perspective versus all the other cloud-based solutions I've seen around this. which is why it's not surprising that a lot of you are here and leaning in with us. So in addition to the number of free data sets that we offer from Google and many public data sets that we have, we are working with many of you here, London Stock Exchange, TransUnion, Dun & Bradstreet, Shutterstock, CoreLogic, Bloomberg, Rearc, lots of others to make this data super easily accessible with many more capabilities on the horizon. We recently also launched a clean room capability. So now mutual customers can do joint analysis on shared data sets without necessarily seeing the underlying raw data itself. And we have a lot more tricks up our sleeve here around both clean rooms, shared identities, and more for all of our customers who want to use your data alongside their own. So again, as I wrap up, we want to spend most of the time today giving you some inspiration from some of the things that we're seeing from other partners and customers. Thanks again so much for being here with us. I really hope you enjoy the demos we've got in store and hope that you have some time to network with one another also. We're certainly very grateful for the opportunity to bring everybody together, especially on such a hot day. I know there's a beach right down the street for the afternoon. It's a little small one, but so we're certainly grateful. We know our customers are going to be transforming their business faster than we've ever seen, and we think we have a huge opportunity to do it faster with all of you. So again, thanks for coming. Please give us your feedback for today so we can continue to hone on events like this and grow our businesses together. Dom, am I passing it back to you?
Thanks a lot. Stephen. All right, so we're going to start making our way into some of our partner content. So I'm going to welcome Tim from the London Stock Exchange to the stage. He's going to talk a little bit about why he chose BigQuery and the opportunity that it's unlocking for all of our customers.
Thank you, Dom.
Sure.
Green for forward, red for backwards, I assume. It's a great audience. Thank you for all being here. It's really a pleasure to be in such a wonderful, wonderful, well-designed space. Well, the first question, who am I? It's a question we all ask ourselves many, many times. My name is Tim Anderson. I'm the global head for tick history data and quantitative economic data at the London Stock Exchange, which is the world's longest title. I've been at LSEG for 5 years now. I'm based in New York City, despite the accent. Previous to LSEG, I was at JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank in various front office roles. I was very fortunate in the early 2000s to be in the front office at Deutsche Bank when algo trading was beginning to take shape and take form. And I've learned a lot through that experience. And when I came to a data provider, first of all, Refinitiv, which became LSEG, a lot of that experience that I went through in those traumatic times in the early 2000s with dealing with big data when it was first coming, I've been able to apply it at LSEG. This quote always resonates with me. My mathematical professor at university had 2 blackboards very similar to this, and he'd always keep this statement on one blackboard as he did the lecture on the other. He never wanted to explain what it meant, but what he was really trying to get at was nothing makes sense until it does. And really what I tried to take from that was it's not until you truly understand a new way of doing something, when there's a paradigm shift in the market, does it become much clearer. The way that you always do something seems to be the only logical way until a door opens somewhere else and shows you that there might be another way to do it. So when I started to see what the offerings came from BigQuery, I came back to this quote because I started to see there's potentially a new way to do things at LSEG and a new way to do things for our customers. So I'm going to talk about tick history. It's kind of a not so interesting name, but where does tick history come from? Well, LSEG, which was previously Refinitiv, we record everything off our real-time networks as historical data, and we record it in point-in-time fashion. So you can go back in time and see when particular market events and recordings occurred at any given point in time on any market. So we have 222 plus billion updates we're recording off our real-time networks. And we have close to 600 exchanges which we're recording from. So when we come to tick history, We go back all the way back to 1996 with almost 600 exchanges. Our hedge fund customers, our tier one bank customers, our research customers are using this data as a map of the markets. It's the foundational data set that you always should refer back to understand how particular occurrences in a given market have had impact. So as I said, the product, it's point in time, recorded in nanosecond and microsecond rates. It's a map of the markets. 92 trillion rows of data we've recorded. It's 132 trillion market updates with close to 80 petabytes of data. We went out to market and asked our customers, how do they want to use our tick history data? Because if you just record it off the real-time networks, it's very unstructured. It doesn't always quite line up the way you want it to line up. Every exchange is different. It comes from countries with different languages that they use and different ways of recording and different equipment and so forth. The number one fact that every customer wants is they want the data to be normalized, which means structured. They want the coverage, which we've got. And if you see the fifth one there, it's the delivery mechanism. So what we did with our tick history is we normalized the data with what's, and I'm sorry about Amazon, Google, my fault. We have a unique identifier, the RIC code, which references every single security on every single exchange in the world. So you have an identifier, and it's point in time as well. So if you have Citibank and it changes entities over a course of time, or if it's Google which becomes Alphabet, we have that point in time because you might want to backtest on when Google was Google and when Google was Alphabet. It's a very neat way of doing it. It's very well structured and very easy to write your algos to. And there's the example of our structure. Now, as I touched on before, having so much data is cool, but there's one problem with it. With so much data, how do you store it all? And here's an example. In the last 3 years, there's been a 66% increase in the amount of real-time data. That's people trading on the markets. A 66% increase. It's only going to become more. If you think with the US elections coming up, there's going to be even more volume on the market. And as I said, we're close to 75 petabytes now. That's a lot of data. So if you're working on-prem, or even if you're just storing it in your own cloud, that's significant cost. And Stephen touched on this point. It's nuts. It's crazy that we still live in a world where we extract data from and download it from a data provider, transform it into the way that we want it to look, and load it into our own homegrown database. And that process might take hours, days, weeks. With 75 petabytes of data, you're not doing that in a few hours. We need to come up with a term about data efficiency. As Stephen touched on about data pointing. How do we use data in the most fuel-efficient, economic way possible? And there's just a back of a napkin analysis on one of our exchanges. It's very, very easy to get to 12 petabytes of data. Because you also think that you replicate data around your organizations. You might be the market data group, but you might have a data science team in Bangalore who wants to look at a particular portion of an exchange. You might cut that data away and copy it to a Hadoop cluster somewhere. You've just doubled your data. And I coined this the database wall, the on-prem database wall. We've all been here. We've all been in the middle here, that we can't fight our way out of our own database. We're talking to our procurement teams, we're talking to our front office teams, and we're all fighting because we can't buy enough hard drive space and we can't buy enough compute to work with the data that we have. And it's a never-ending process. And what eventually happens is your cost goes up, your performance goes down, the data keeps coming off the real-time network. You never get out of this cycle and you hit the wall. The other part is this, time to insight. I've had many vendors quote to me how fast their on-prem systems are, and true, yes, they are fast. But they always talk about the query time, how long it takes to run the query. They don't talk about the part that it takes to load the data into that particular system, the hours to get it in there. That should be factored in as well. One other part I just want to briefly talk about is for LSEG, is that we're recording our tick history data at microsecond intervals. That's 1/1,000,000th of a second. We record our PCAP data at a billionth of a second. So you can see everything in between that's occurring on a market. How every packet, how every trade, how every piece of data. Now, just a very quick analogy. We call this the shutter speed on a camera hypothesis. To be that granular, and it's very important if you're running high performance algos to be that granular. So if you have a faster shutter speed, you're going to be recording more data, i.e. the files on your camera are a lot larger. So PCAP is our best, tick history just behind, and of course all the other vendors are behind that. So let's get on to delivery. Stephen touched on this. It is crazy. And here's an actual email, and I apologize to the customer. I removed their name from this one. This is an email that still comes through in 2024. Would you please check if there's any problem for the file-specific daily upload in the FTP location? It's 2024, and we're still talking about FTP. So along comes Google, high-performance query engine. We put our entire tick history database into BigQuery. And Stephen touched on again, it has separation of storage and compute. This is an actual customer on the right-hand side here. Took them 50 days to download the data on-prem, took them 180 days to get it into their system. That's almost a year just to use our data. Crazy. So, we put it into BigQuery. We share the data into your Google environment. You do not have to store the data. It's ready, it's on demand, it's available. You do not need to pay for the storage. LSEG manages that for you. You can query and get your insights super fast. And we call it hedge fund in a box. We like that name because you can get up and running just like that. Super, super fast. 30 years of history, point in time, map of the markets, the 92 trillion rows, which by the end of this talk will be 93 trillion rows, I hope. And how does it work? Well, think of a jigsaw puzzle. All we do is we walk up to your Google environment and we snap out 75 petabytes of data directly into your Google environment. It becomes part of your ecosystem, and away you go. It's a beautiful, beautiful way of dealing with it. You can use the Google console, or you can use command line interfaces, but you can see your data. You can see our data at the same time. You can run queries against your data and our data simultaneously. It's a very, very simplistic way of doing things. You can run queries against our RICs. You can run analytics against any field, date ranges across venues. It's a very, very simple way of doing things. And again, no downloading, no storing of the data. Now, we had one customer come to us, and they had an on-prem system. It took them 8 hours to run this query. And we're going to show you in a live demonstration of how fast we can run it. So it went from 8 hours, and that's all trades, all quotes, open, high, lows, low close, TWAPs and VWAPs, quotes and trade statistics in one analytic. Took them 8 hours to run it on every single exchange. If it broke for them overnight, it wouldn't be ready for the next day of trading. So we'll show you how fast this runs. Just one other point on how we set this up. We partition by venue and we partition by day. So on each exchange you have a day. We've clustered on the RIC and the price and the volume. And this makes it super, super fast. So when you want to pull out, say, Google or Amazon or IBM, it goes directly to that point in the haystack and you can pull that needle out. You can go in reverse. You can say, give me a point in time when volume was increasing by X% and show me the securities that were doing that on a given day in the market. It's super, super fast. Not only is it super, super fast, it's super, super cheap on compute. Because we've clustered, we've got data efficiency on the actual queries that you run. We did this with one customer. We did a TCO analysis. We went down to cabling, hardware, rack space, air conditioning, everything to find out how much it cost them to run an on-prem system and how much in BigQuery. About $4 in BigQuery all in and $110 per gigabyte for on-prem. Doesn't seem like a huge difference, but when you get to 75 petabytes, it's a lot. It's a lot, huge amounts, in the millions. And here You hear a quote all the time that data is the new oil. Well, here is the oil refinery. This is how you tap the golden source. LSEG runs the tick history database up the top here, has the full history on every single exchange in the world. Daily updates come through at the end of market close. We share that directly into the customer's instant down the bottom there. They do not have to store the data. They can see their data, they can see our data, they can run concurrent queries. They can use the data pointing aspect of this as well. So if they have other users in their own environment that they want to share some of the data to, they want to limit the amount of compute that they have, customer can manage all that themselves. We are doing all of this sharing on their behalf. It's a wonderful, wonderful system, and we've got several key customers already doing this and effectively running a zero-copy tick plant in their environment. So they've gone from spending around in the double-digit millions on a tick plant to not spending a lot on this. Now, Gen AI. It had to come, didn't it? And this is Gen AI with a mouse click. Having Vertex AI snapped into BigQuery, you don't need to go off and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on on-prem hardware for AI. We snapped in Vertex AI into BigQuery and used it on tick history. Like this, an extra jigsaw piece. And you think, well, what was the result of that? We use tick history. We use another product we have called Market Psych. We put that into BigQuery, and we put some machine-readable news in there too. And what came out the other side? We built, in about 3 days, a full analyst report. So this is the type of reports that investment banks and hedge funds build for their customers. So it went out there into tick history. It did an analysis on BT and Vodafone on the London Stock Exchange. It was even doing calculations. It was creating VWAPs and checking the volume. It was then looking at machine-readable news and correlating that when there was an increase in price or volume, what were the news stories that occurred around that time that could have impacted those increases. It then went into Market Psych and looked at the social media buzz. So what were people talking about on Twitter and Facebook and all the business sites as well, and made a correlation to that and saw that was what the Vox Populi was saying. It was then doing calculations off that, and at the end, it built a summary of buy, hold, and sell on those two particular stocks. This is the type of thing that junior bankers build overnight and spend hours and hours procuring data trying to build analyst reports. And we built this in 3 days. We also built a command line prompt for it as well that you can ask any question of tick history or our data that you want to ask. Very, very exciting, very, very impressive, but also very, very fast. And of course, if you want to build that yourself, it gave us the SQL output as well. So it closes the gap between the front office business logic and the people building it in the background by coding. You now have one system that does the whole thing. Okay, I'm getting close to the end. Can someone take a photo of me in front of this slide? I want to show it to my father. Does anyone know what this is? This is a fractal. And Brian Williams, and you should Google him after this, Brian Williams owned a hedge fund in Connecticut, and he was like the forefather of fractal trading. And fractal trading, in very simplistic terms, is it was discovered that patterns recreate in everything in life, whether it's biology, our own personal lives. If you have an espresso martini at the bar and you look at the bubbles that form, they're patterns, those bubbles. And what he'd learnt was there's pathways to those patterns. So when those patterns reoccur in the stock market, and you probably saw when you walked into Pier 57, there's birds. Birds do the same thing. They fly in patterns. One peels off to the right, one peels to the left. They follow. The market is doing exactly the same thing. Patterns are recreating. So when you use something like BigQuery, you do a concept called backtesting. Now here's my very quick analysis on flights from New York to Miami. You do this yourself. You backtest in your head. You're looking for the lowest price to get to Miami. So you kind of remember, well, I need to get there for Thanksgiving. What's the cheapest price to get there? And that's what traders do. They're looking for the most efficient methods of trading to get the lowest price or the highest sell. And that's exactly what they do on tick history. And that's sort of called transactional cost analysis. And here's my dreadful, well, it wasn't too bad. I drew this on a napkin as well. But you can see if you fly the day before Thanksgiving or the day after Thanksgiving, you can get the lowest price. And that's what a lot of traders do with tick history data. And we did this actual test where we used machine-readable news. We found a signal called Qatar raises crude. We put real time into BigQuery, and we can see that every time Qatar raises the price of crude oil, we can see an increase in Shell. And because we've done that in the back-testing sense, we can put real-time data into BigQuery, we can stream in our machine-readable news, real-time news headlines, algo trading. Every time it sees Qatar raises price of crude, it trades. It's very, very easy to set up. This is what people used to spend millions on building on-prem. And we can do it all with mouse clicks in BigQuery. Now, I think I've spoken enough. I want to hand over to my esteemed colleagues, Taylor and Nicole, to give actual demonstrations of what I've talked about today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. All right, I have a mic. Good. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tim. My name is Taylor Whitcomb, and this is my colleague, Nicole Pappert. We've built a demonstration that will be hooked up shortly. We're going to go through a number of things in GCP, primarily demonstrating both the speed and scalability of the platform using London Stock Exchange data. So if we can just give this a second. There's a couple things I want to point out before Nicole gets into the demo. One of the first most important things here is that we have a whole bunch of code written. It might look pretty boring at first, but the fundamental important parts that we need to look at are the source of the data, the qualifiers being used, such as the fields, and then also the calculated variables that we're going to have as the output. The exercise here, the demonstration, is minute bars. It's a very standard practice for a lot of our clients, ultimately a very simple and necessary part of a lot of data transformation in the industry. So, Nicole, if you want to kick us off and tell us about the code.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you can see on the screen here, this is the baseline query that we're going to use for the demonstration. And as we show you this fun concept called sublinear scaling, we're going to build up from it as we go. So we are choosing a singular trading day from London Stock Exchange. We picked June 3rd from the example. And the data in tick history and GCP BigQuery, we have it in columnar tables partitioned by day. So you can see at the top that the query will process 7 gigabytes. So in order to really optimize this, we're going to limit it to just a select few variables. So for this, we just need the date and time of the trader quote message, the RIC, which is the instrument code, the trade price, the bid price, the ask price, the trade volume, the trade turnover, which is essentially the liquidity of the stock, it's price times volume, and the venue sequence number. And to start out, we are just limiting this to one instrument. We picked Vodafone. And we are going to look at the first trading hour of the day, so from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And the goal of this query is we are building, as Taylor mentioned, 1-minute interval bars. We're going to calculate some trade statistics for a given instrument. So because we're starting out with just Vodafone for 1 hour, we're going to see 60 rows of data with various trade statistics that are specific to Vodafone. And we are calculating the average bid, the average ask, open, high, low, and close, the bar VWAP, which is the volume-weighted average price, the bar TWAP, time-weighted average price, the trade volume, turnover, and the first and last trade timestamp for the trade execution. So now let's see this in action. I'm going to run this query, and we're going to see how quick it goes. So for this given hour, for Vodafone, there were around 6,000 trade and quote updates that came across the feed. So we can see that the results are popping up here. We can just take a look. Everything looks right. You see that there's 60 rows, and all of the calculations are here. And this data is ready for you to go use. We're going to look here in job information. This is very important. So we can see that this query took only a second to run. And because, as I mentioned before, we optimized the query, instead of having 7 gigabytes of data process and build, we only have around 100 megabytes. Now let's see what happens if we increase the input. We're going to increase the time from 1 hour to 1 full week of trading data. So I'm going to adjust this quickly. So the input here is increasing by 4 times in terms of time. And for this whole week, there were around 350,000 trading quote updates for Vodafone that came across the feed. So let's see how quick this one runs. All right, loading. And we can see here how long did it take. Not very long, so it only went up by around a second. Now, let's see what happens if we increase the number of instruments from 1 to 100. And here we have selected 100 of the most liquid stocks that trade on LSE so that we get a substantial amount of the trading activity on the venue. And everything else is going to be held constant. So we are now querying over a week's worth of time. And the number of updates for these RICs that came across is around 21 million. So that's the number of rows that BigQuery is running through to calculate these stats. You can see that the time has only gone up by a couple seconds now, up to 5 seconds. So you can see this is going. The amount of input is, at this point, exponentially increasing. But the amount of time it's taking for BigQuery to run these statistics is only increasing by a couple seconds. And now, finally, we are going to increase this to an entire month. So now we have gone from 6,000 rows of inputted filtered data to 350,000 to 21,000 and finally to 86 million. And this query is running through 131 gigabytes of data. And we can see here, if we look at the job information, that this took only 15 seconds.
Oh. As you can see, it's incredibly fast. It's actually comedically fast to ours. We started with the entire London Stock Exchange daily file, which is usually around 7 gigabytes a day, as you can see from the first query. We're partitioning that down by the RIC. In this case, it's the 100 most liquid on the exchange, and then a number of different clustering variables, such as the day, the price, the volume, et cetera. With those metrics in mind, we're able to limit our querying limit completely and bring it down to 88 gigabytes when it would normally be, as Nicole mentioned, 130. With all of that and the concept of Google's sublinear scaling, we're able to dramatically reduce the time it takes to process all of this content and ultimately produce extremely fast results. Thank you. Back to Tim.
Thank you, Taylor and Nicole. And this is the last slide I want to. What they were demonstrating there, they were doubling and then doubling again and doubling again and doubling again the amount of data they were putting through BigQuery. They weren't breaking it up. They weren't pre-preparing it. The time that it took didn't double itself. And that's the power of BigQuery. It has sublinear scaling. And sublinear means the more data you throw at it, the faster it gets. So in the example that I had prior, where it took a particular customer 8 hours to run a query on one venue, and they had 249 venues, we got that down to 1 second. So we went from 8 hours of processing to 1 second on BigQuery. That is a fundamental shift, and that's why I come back to that original quote, nothing makes sense until it does. When you show 8 hours to 1 second, and it cost about $2 a year in compute costs, it changed everything for them. Because even if they make a mistake on the query, even if there's some bad data or something doesn't quite go right, they've got time to reiterate and to change it and to modify it and to fix it. So hopefully today we've been able to show a few wonderful, amazing things here with BigQuery. We're very proud partners with Google at LSEG, and we look forward to speaking to you all after the event. And any questions, please come and see us outside. And thanks to Dom and Peter. Thank you, and Stephen.
Thank you, Tim. You know, I'm going to get to the numbers in a moment, but 93 trillion rows of data and counting is something that makes me proud on a daily basis. So once again, I'm Peter Leonard. I lead customer engineering here in New York. I've been at Google for 13 years. I spent a bunch of time on the ad side of the business. I joined cloud in 2016. Prior to life at Google, I was a software engineer, and some of my first jobs out of school were writing ETL jobs and feed handlers and the like. And when I came to Google and I saw what we had under the hood back in 2011 that was powering all of what Google had, it was frankly kind of mind-blowing. All of my time in cloud since I joined 8 years ago has been about taking all of the really cool stuff that we built internally to solve our own problems and bringing it to all of you. So today's event is a lot of fun for me from that end. What we're seeing writ large are sort of two major trends in the industry. The first is this explosion of data sharing, right? And what we're seeing time and time again is companies and customers that have been struggling for years on the merging of first and third party data to create better insights and really benefit from the augmentation, creation of customer data platforms in financial markets, just tying all of the data like you see with LSEG with their own internal proprietary data is only becoming more and more demanding and more critical. And so this is one major push that we're seeing. The second one, back to Stephen's over-under, is AI. And so to that end, Google has two major products that we've already talked about. The first one is BigQuery. The second one is Vertex, which is our managed AI platform that covers all things from training to prediction and is the tool that your engineers use when they're building for the future. The use cases that we're really going to cover today run the gamut from modern data takes on data engineering, such as what Tim just talked about, and what we're going to hear a little bit more, a lot of the traditional engineering, to the cutting edge development and what happens once you have all of your data in one place. And I'm going to remind everyone here, I think you all know this, but maybe some of your peers at your companies don't fully understand this. AI can be really cool, it can be really sexy, it gets a lot of attention, it gets a lot of mind share, but your AI strategy, unless it has a foundational data strategy where you understand and really have a handle on your core data, your AI strategy is simply going to fail. And so having a strong data strategy is frankly step one for everyone. So it's not just the scale that Tim talked about. It's not just the sharing, but it's also the complexity. And so some of what you're going to hear in the next couple of sessions are going to talk about how customers are taking not just the complexity of one data set, but multiple data sets and tying them together and how customers are using this. We see this a lot with entity resolution, especially in open markets and in advertising, where with the deprecation of third-party cookies, for those of you who spend time in the space, identity is becoming an incredibly critical problem and is incumbent on every single advertiser out there in the world to build first-party data strategies. It's not just a B2C use case, but it's also a B2B use case. With BigQuery underpinning all of this, and this is the most technical slide you will see from me for today, I want to put a finer point on what happens when you fundamentally decouple compute and storage. Your organizations probably still have data warehouses scattered all over the place, right? Tim touched on this a little bit ago about, data teams in Bangalore versus data teams in the US versus data teams in Europe that are all trying to do different things with different copies of the same data. That is just a road to pain and hurt and suffering that no one should be going through. But it's where we've all been for decades. And this is what goes away. And this is what was the coolest thing to me when I came to Google. Because we built these tools originally to solve our own problems. My personal fun fact in all of this, and Tim has completely dwarfed me, but the first trillion-row log file that was seen at Google was back in 2003. Right? There was nothing that could handle that scale at that time, and so we had to build our own stuff. And when you work here and you want to access data sets from different teams, from different departments, there's no copying of data whatsoever. It's all entitlements. You can, and obviously there are all sorts of very stringent controls about what everyone is allowed to see and what everyone is allowed to access, and there are very strong governance policies. But assuming that you are allowed to see the data, accessing that data, sharing that data with someone else is no harder than sharing a document or a spreadsheet. Right? There is no version 1 of the data over here and version 4 of the data over here and 4A and 4AA final and whatever else. There's one version of the data set. There's pointers everywhere they go to it, and that's that. Nothing more. All right. And so what this works in the data provider world and how this works for all of you, and this is not just for external relationships with your customers, but this also works internally, is you use Analytics Hub to handle all of the entitlements, to handle the controls, to handle who can see what and when and how, and you get to control it, right? The owner of the data gets to control who has access to it. And the beauty of this, both internally and externally, is while the owner of the data is responsible for the storage costs, the consumer of that data is responsible for the compute costs on that analysis. So if you as a data provider are sharing that data, you no longer have to send Delta files, you no longer have to send updates, you no longer have to worry about any of that maintenance. You just keep your one clean data set. Your customers no longer have to deal with that, but they're responsible for all of their ongoing compute work. And that works internally as well. Chargeback models become a lot simpler, right? You don't have to deal with any of this complexity. People just focus on the job that they really need to do, which is the analysis, which is the insight. It's not about setting up a Hadoop cluster. It's not about maintaining that ETL job. My younger self would have killed for this. And so Stephen talked about this a little bit, but this is the future. This is where the world is going, right? No more maintaining all of these copies. It's about having just a pointer. For those of you with computer science degrees, or have taken a computer science class, you probably learned about pointers way back when. This is what we've all been looking for a long time, right? And so when you think about this from a BigQuery perspective, this falls into sort of 3 major areas. Analytics Hub is a system by which the data is actually shared. Data clean rooms are used when you have multi-party transactions where you need to provide some level of privacy and protection to your data sets. So think of multi-party data exchanges, for example, where you have an advertiser, a retailer, and a measurement company that are all they're all bringing their own individual data sets to the table, but they don't want to share all pieces of that data. This is where you use data clean rooms to get to the insights that you need. And lastly, an entity resolution framework when you need to tie all of your data to knowledge graphs to really build out the nuanced version of the insights that you're trying to get to. So now you've cleaned up your entire data strategy, and you get to the fun stuff, right? You get to do the AI, right? But this isn't the fun world of unfettered research. This isn't, getting your AI model to write your 9th grade history paper. This isn't watching videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti. For those of you who remember that video from last year, it feels like a lifetime ago. This is the real world where data matters, and facts matter, and accuracy matters, and IP matters, and brand safety matters. And so the other talks that you're going to hear about later today is how all of this data becomes foundational to driving real world outcomes where all of these things matter. And so what we see in the data provider space are sort of use cases that fall into 2 major areas. The first is for providers who are looking to create better capabilities, whether it's in the data sets or in their SaaS offerings, but better capabilities and better products for their end customers. And the second is when those providers are working with their end customers to allow them to innovate on their own capabilities through the sharing of this data, right? Because all of a sudden you have a model for collaboration that didn't really exist in the past. And so to that end, this kind of falls into a number of different use cases in the AI space. We see a lot of companies that are democratizing access to data by using natural language interfaces, to query data rather than having to use SQL. A lot of folks are actually using Gemini to start writing SQL queries themselves and get better interfaces. Think of AI as a user interface rather than just the thing that drives outputs. It's allowing better understanding of unstructured data, right? Think about all of the stuff you see out in the industry around multimodal use cases with AI, right? But again, foundational data strategy is critical to this. We are seeing much more related to enrichment. When you have the ability to get real understanding out of all of these different types of data that are structured and unstructured, and now you can augment them with first and third party data sets, this really creates all sorts of new data products that are so much more valuable because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay. And then on the customer side, we are seeing much more data-driven content generation. Tim's example around analyst reports is a prime example of what's possible. Right? We see streamlined workflows because people are able to move much more quickly with AI as an assistant for the work that they are really trying to get done. And then we see a lot of model augmentation because grounding matters and facts matter and accurate data matters. Okay. And so with that, we're going to get on to the next speaker, and we're going to talk about more around data delivery. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dom and to the folks from Choreograph and D&B. So thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So Evan, Isabel, if you will join me on stage.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, we have one session before we'll take a quick break. Yeah, you can hand it to me. I'll put it over here. We got you mic'd up. Here we go. Well, thank you, Evan and Isabel, for joining us here today. I have the pleasure of looking after both partnerships with D&B and Choreograph. So we're going to spend some time today talking a little bit about the journey Choreograph and D&B have gone on from a Google Cloud customer to a Google Cloud partner, and how that's really propelling them to think differently about how they're distributing data. So we're going to jump right in, and we'll get started with telling us a little bit about you, your role, your organization, and the partnership with Google Cloud. Evan, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks, Dom. So hi, everyone. My name's Evan Hanlon. I'm the CEO of Choreograph, which is the data and technology company that's part of Group M and WPP. And we really have sort of two roles within there. The first is to make sure that we're building the sort of best-in-class and sort of next-generation media planning and buying platform that all of our client teams ultimately use as part of Group M. And the other piece of it, which has been just as important, is making sure that our clients and customers more broadly have access to the best-in-class data that is really necessary to make sure that media planning and buying in today's day and age is really powered with the signals that they need to be successful.
Thanks, Evan. Isabel, over to you.
First of all, thank you for having me here. I see really familiar faces, so hi, everybody. So a little bit about myself, Isabel Gomez Vidal. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Dun & Bradstreet. Hi, it's good to see you. And I joined the corporation just around 2 months ago, responsible for the go-to-market activities and customer engagement model. Just a little bit about D&B for those who don't know much about us. It's a company that has been around for over 180 years. Very few of us around there, right? And we've been serving customers, a very large and diverse customer base from small businesses all the way to global large enterprises across all industries, from banks, corporations, insurance companies, and government institutions, across all use cases and customer personas. In fact, we're engaging with chief data officers, with chief compliance officers, with CMOs, CROs, head of third-party risk, just to name a few. And there are 3 areas that we're helping customers with. One is sales acceleration. So many of sales and marketing professionals are actually relying on the insights that we produce in order to decide what is the target addressable market, their market position, and really create strategies that enable them to drive revenue and stay ahead of the competition. The second area that we focus on is risk mitigation. So really helping customers to think about the creditworthiness of their individuals and the companies that they are doing business with, as well as risk from a portfolio level. And then third, and not last, is stay compliant. If you think about the incredible amount of change from a regulatory perspective, many customers need to understand who they're doing business with and really try to make sense of what I think is a very complex regulatory framework. And so at the essence of that is our core data and insights. We have over 570 million of businesses that we monitor. We give deep insights in the relationships, from ultimate beneficial ownership to information about corporate hierarchies, mergers and acquisitions, divestiture. And again, our customers depend and use those data and insights in order to make strategies around growth, around risk mitigation, and around being compliant.
Thanks, Isabel.
You're welcome.
So Choreograph and D&B have been strong Google Cloud customers for many years now, and we've just started to kind of come together to serve our mutual customers. Can you share some insights on why you're taking this step and why now? Isabel, we'll start with you this time.
So we started, we transitioned from being a customer of Google into a real true partnership. And really started in 2022 when we signed, and it's very,
Big
open knowledge, a 10 years relationship with Google, partly because we were going through this digital transformation and modernizing our infrastructure. And we wanted to make sure that we were first of mind for our customers in terms of the innovation that we could bring together to the market. The second area is obviously Google's a consumer of our products and insights in order to bring new use cases to customers. But two areas that have been really critically important and game changer is how we modernize the data delivery to our customers. So we are leveraging, as you know, Google Cloud BigQuery, and I know this morning, you guys have been talking a lot about that, but it's been a game changer for our customers in giving data that is real time and in a more efficient, cost-efficient way. And then the second area is we're putting many and deploying many of our SaaS solutions and data sets like D&B Hoovers and the Audience Builder. It's actually available in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So many customers can now deploy that at scale, and again, a massive game changer for us.
Yeah, and it really was that propelling of like becoming a customer, migrating all of those solutions. That's really unlocking all of the things that we can do to modernize how you're delivering the data.
Exactly.
Evan, what about for you?
Sure. So I think where the marketing space has been historically is that when it came to data and what was used to drive marketing performance, there was a lot of ideology that was driven by practicality. And what I mean by that is that given the sort of speed, complexity, time, sort of heavy lifting that was required historically, people would sort of make these big bets on what was the most important data set, right? And sort of the early 2010s, right, it was all about sort of digital programmatic data, took a turn towards CRM, right? And we've sort of gone through these ups and downs and these waves of sort of what was sort of in fashion and the most important thing. And what we saw from our clients was that that's not good enough, right? You need to be flexible, you need to be able to sort of be able to make connections across lots of different varieties and domains of data that maybe historically we have not been used to. And that was really the imperative for us to really think about how do we modernize our infrastructure and our ability to deliver that data in a really meaningful way. And if you look within the marketing space, right, there are parts of our business that are digitally native and that sort of were born in the cloud. But there's other parts of our business that have incredibly deep and important wells of data, particularly on the CRM side where, born out of the Wunderman agency doing direct mail back in the 1950s. And if you looked at the infrastructure of it, it felt like it still was back in the 1950s. And we needed a way to really start to bring all of those pieces together. And so for the past couple of years, the recognition for us was if we wanted to deliver modern, superior sort of data strategies in media and marketing, we needed a modern data delivery and sort of harmonization sort of mechanism. And that's where I think the partnership with Google Cloud, the unlocks of BigQuery, as well as just the general sort of gain and capability that we've seen in the past couple of years has been crucial for us to be able to sort of deliver that flexibility.
And we've spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks kind of talking about where do we start from this go-to-market partnership. And we've made our way to starting with the AmeriLink database. Tell us a little bit about why we decided to start there and the opportunity that it unlocks for our customers that may have data in BigQuery, but may also be a Google Cloud's ads customer.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there was an over-under on AI, and there was probably an over-under on cookie deprecation at some point, which in the marketing space and the advertising space is what we spend a lot of time talking about right now. This sort of, single common currency that we have been used to for far too long, is finally going away, or eventually going away, hopefully next year, if Google stops delaying it. And I think this is actually really a good thing, right? It's an antiquated, old way of doing things that I think has sort of actually encouraged sort of bad behavior, and I think some laziness for quite a bit of time. And now we are starting to have to get used to sort of new ways of doing things and invent new ways of doing things. I think that there is sort of one sort of strain of thought that I think is looking at what is the replacement. I think that is probably the wrong direction. I think we need to be much more comfortable with a world of flexibility, of distributed data and identity. But in order to be able to do that, we really need a strong core to sort of really tune and deliver a sort of understanding for our clients of what the world looks like, particularly from our perspective. And for us, where everything old is new again, that's where the AmeriLink database was super important for us. This was born, again, out of that sort of Wonderman direct marketing channel. And it's a way for us to get a good read on over 250 million consumers in the United States, and really is a sort of core for us to start to not, I think, override and replace the cookie, but to be the sort of foundational data set to start to partner really closely with folks like Dun & Bradstreet and others, and really think about how do we build that network for our clients.
Awesome. So Isabel, D&B, as you mentioned, has over 50 data sets available in BigQuery today, 2 SaaS solutions. We talked a little bit about D&B Hoovers.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about why, in today's data-driven environment, enterprises should consider Hoovers as part of their strategy.
Yeah, and you said a couple and 50, there's more coming.
There's more coming.
Everybody knows.
50 is a good place to start, though.
This is just the beginning. But just in relation to D&B Hoovers, is our flagship solution for sales and marketing professionals, and is being critically important for us in terms of the extensive database that has, as well as contact information to really decide who is your ideal customer and an ideal profile that you want to target. And it's used by thousands and thousands of household names globally. We've done an incredible amount of innovation. For example, it has alerts. So every time that there's a change on customer contacts, it will alert to the end user. We've incorporated contextual search so that users can provide and get a smart list. We've also added just recently what we call a smartmail.ai, talking about Gen AI, which again helps the end user when it's in the application to actually, in addition to identify prospect, it's also send emails to them directly. So again, it's about creating efficiencies. It's about understanding your target addressable market and be faster and optimize your sales and marketing strategies. As you said, it's available in the marketplace, and it can be deployed at scale, used by thousands and thousands of users.
Well, you said it, Isabel. I didn't. Gen AI, right? So tell us a little bit more about how D&B is thinking about the Gen AI opportunity and how you're even leveraging some of Google's technologies and embedding those in products like Hoovers.
Yeah, so how much time do we have? So Gen AI is top of mind for us. It's top of mind for our customers. And I think there is no a single day that passes by where we don't have a discussion either internally or with customers around Gen AI. But I think over the last 12 months, things have changed, and we've crossed the threshold between what is perception and reality of Gen AI and data and businesses. And the anchor point is that you need trusted data to have trusted results. And so at D&B, we typically talk about, we provide intelligence into AI, right? We've been using large language models and AI for a decade. And we've been very thoughtful about curating databases, sourcing those data sources from ethical providers, doing all the validation that is required to include in DANs, what we call the DANs numbers, which are a very, very critical business identifier when it comes to becoming AI ready. And so we've been helping many customers, for example, around master data management and how they use the DUN numbers as an entity verification and start training their models and start getting more use cases around Gen AI. We launched DMB Labs AI a few months ago, where we enable our customers in a very safe environment to experiment with Gen AI through our data with different use cases. And in fact, as you know, we are using in our innovation Vertex AI, which we talk a lot about this morning, and we're rolling this out in our sales and marketing solutions, in our risk and finance solutions, and again, really important when it comes to the DMB AI labs. So we're very pleased with the progress that we've made.
It's the theme of enterprise truth that always sticks top of mind for me as we have these discussions. So Evan, we could talk about AI all day, so I've got to ask you the same question. How are you thinking about the AI opportunity, and how do you think that that changes and accelerates the partnership that we're building together?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that, we are a bit plagued on the marketing and the media side of the world from a Gen AI perspective, because most people think it's like a funny way to generate images and sort of accelerate the creative side of the world, which I think sometimes means that we're missing, I think, what the real opportunity is for us, which very much sort of sits on the media side of the world. And so for me, it's starting to connect different sort of and very disparate domains of data, and in particular, thinking about how can we use structured data to unearth really interesting and sort of never before looked for insights that we can develop from the unstructured data side of the world. Historically, the media game was all about scale, right? If you spent the most money, you had the most negotiation leverage, you could drive the price down. And now it's one where if you spend the most money, you have the most data, you have the most intelligence on what you can ultimately derive from it. So when I look at it, we have planners on an annual basis generating over 50,000 plans, from our already sort of AI-infused sort of planning tools. If you look at the sort of, average line item of a campaign today, it's over 100,000 line items at this point. This is generating 34 petabytes of campaign data on an annual basis, which we don't really do all that much with, right? We do some very basic analysis, we do some very basic market curation with it. But as we start to think about the sort of very obvious pieces, right, thinking about the sort of customer data side of the world and what we see from a consumer database point of view, and connecting it to these other sort of very untapped wells of potential, we see a huge opportunity of being able to start to deliver superior value and insight for our clients that we haven't been doing before.
Yeah. It unlocks a whole other realm of possibility.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's one of those things that I think, the partnership is really exciting for us about, because there's a lot of things that we have hypotheses and ideas about, but we don't necessarily know what's going to come out of it and where that ultimately, sort of will emerge from.
Right.
And so I think having sort of very good partners on the Google side of the world, I think is really critical for us to sort of, I think, mine the potential for it, which obviously given, Google might be in the advertising business as well.
Might be.
There's a very nice sort of virtuous circle for us to think about how that starts to plug into the ad side of the business too.
Yeah, bringing it together and really building out that better together story. So we have a couple of minutes left. We're going to do a speed round for you guys. I want to hear from you. We have a number of data providers in the audience, and we also have data consumers. So any advice that you would have for either a data provider that may be thinking about going on this journey with Google Cloud, monetizing their data, or for any customers in the room that may be sitting here hearing the conversation about ETL and getting things on flat files and maybe thinking, oh, well, I've got to start consuming data in the cloud. Any advice?
So very short, data quality, trusted data is what matters the most. If you are in a data scientist role, probably many of you are spending 80% of your time trying to source data, curate the data, clean the data. Why to do that when you have really important and trusted vendors that can help you with that, and then deploy that into Google Cloud to be able to use that at scale and be able to consume the data in the way that you want to, I think is critically important.
Yeah.
I think my main thing is the best time to do it is now. It only gets harder. We had been having the conversation about this for years, and everyone was scared because it seemed too painful, too hard. And it was hard, but it wasn't as hard as sort of we thought it was going to be. And again, if we were starting now, we would feel incredibly behind the sort of, 8 ball on it. So I think it's you just got to go. Yeah.
You just got to get started. I always think about, I'm a runner, so every time I sign up for a new half marathon, I'm like, I just got to get started and it'll become a lot easier.
Out the door.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Isabel
you.
and Evan, for being here.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break. So we'll have a number of our partner speakers that are going to be hanging out in the pre-function room. So please feel free to pull them aside if you have any questions.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a couple minutes.
Thank you. So good to see you.
See you too.
Good to meet you.
All right, so I want to thank everyone. I know that you're all having fun in outside, socializing and hobnobbing and building plans to take on the world. We'll have time for a little bit more of that in a little while, but I want to get back to what we have going on. So to ground everyone, again, I'm going to bring this slide back up. We're still in the world of data sharing. And we were talking earlier about the importance of having a strong data foundation, strong first-party data strategy, strong grounding on what's going on. And so we're going to talk for a little bit longer about the importance of entity resolution and how organizations are using Google technology, their own data sets, and really what they're seeing in the world as to how to really tie a lot of these disparate data sets together. And so with that, I want to bring up Ryan Engel from TransUnion to the stage. Ryan, the floor is yours. Let me give you...
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back. It's nice to see you all here. So far, the event, I think, has been great. And I think kudos to the Google team for kind of putting the content in sequence. So I feel like hopefully this will make more sense now that we've been through some of the content we've been through already. When people hear TransUnion, a lot of the time the first question we get is, well, are you here to talk about credit data? Because everyone knows we're a credit bureau. No, I'm not here to talk about credit data. I used to be responsible for credit marketing. Recent change, I'm not anymore, but I'm here to talk about marketing in general. And TransUnion has been a foundational data provider in the marketing space for a long time. They've also been growing via acquisition, and I joined TransUnion just a couple of years ago as part of a Neustar acquisition. So Neustar was the second biggest onboarder. It's the leading provider of MTA, multi-touch attribution, in the marketing space. Had quite a reputation, and we've joined TransUnion and sort of combined forces in the marketing space. And I'll be talking a bit about the capabilities that we have within Google Cloud and the relevance. I think Peter said it well, like how do we make sense of the data? How do we curate the data to actually make it useful? So that's what I'll be talking about today. Obligatory slide. Introducing TransUnion, of course, every data provider, I think, is going to say, we have the best identity resolution platform with highest quality data in the industry. I'm the head of our identity product, so I have to stand by that, and I do. A couple things I would mention, I guess, like, I wanted to share the slide both like, okay, there's some level of credentialing, but also I think it's just important when we're all talking about different types of data to ground ourselves in like what's the data that we're talking about here and how is that relevant for the use cases. So everyone in this room is a consumer. You're a customer of different brands, like maybe you buy Coke or maybe you buy, I don't know, Levi's jeans or who knows what, right? Everyone consumes something. You live somewhere, you have a phone. Like this is all about consumers in the real world and how we can market to them more effectively. A couple things that set DU apart. So we have a rich offline and online graph. So understanding like data touch points for different consumers. And also we're particularly strong at the linkages from the online space to the offline space. And so like all of our online data signal is related to consumers back in the real world, and that's different versus some of the other identity providers out there. That's relevant, especially as Evan was talking about the cookie deprecation and so on in marketing. If online signal goes away, like what's really important is the linkage from the online signal that's left back to consumers in the real world so that we can market to them more effectively. And so there's a plug there that we receive top accuracy for linking emails to addresses, which from my perspective is like the most important linkage that you can have right now in the market. Okay, just really quickly, we could talk about all kinds of different things, marketing use cases. I just chose 3: customer acquisition, retention, media efficiency. All of our biggest marketer clients are endeavoring to use, we'll come back to AI, AI and machine learning to build more sophisticated models to improve the efficiency of these different marketing tactics. And it can certainly help, but we also hear that from our customers, like they might have an army of dozens of highly compensated data scientist folks. And like, I forget who it was earlier said, these data scientists are spending 80% of their time just curating data, like getting the data in the right place, making sense of it, all this. So there's a highly valuable resource, which is spending their time doing not value add work. And so working with Google Cloud can address some of the challenges that we have, right? So first, okay, you're gonna have data in loads of different places. So we have an automotive client, for example, who has literally 300 different repositories of consumer data within their business. And so like, well, first step, we have to get those 300 data sets into one place. So, okay, cool, Google Cloud. Complex customer journey, so you might reach people on their phone, they might come to your website, you might interact with them in store. Each of those different touch points has a different data collection source, a different data repository, and so on. Okay, let's bring that together in the cloud. Data volume and complexity, I think we spoke a lot about that today with a demo and so on. One thing we haven't talked so much about is the privacy landscape. An additional benefit to the pointer approach is this lack of data transfer, lack of data leakage, and so on. And so there have been some recent data breaches that have been in the news. The more that you're going to be shifting data around, sending it from this provider to that, and so on, or just even within your own environment, every time you extract, transform, load, if you're loading it, there's an opportunity for breach, and so on. And so moving everything to the cloud, keeping it in one place allows you to protect the privacy as well. But just managing the technology part is only half the equation. So forgive my, what's old is new again, the rock'em sock'em robots. Let's call it a 1-2 punch, right? So you're gonna address the technology first, but then the data is really important too. Like, okay, that automotive client of ours, we have 300 different repositories of customer data. That's great. But if I have only emails over here and only phone numbers over here, how am I ever going to make sense of that together and use that in a meaningful way for a customer 360, right? Likewise, the complex customer journey, that's even more of a proliferation of data, right? Are we talking mobile ad IDs, so device IDs from your phone? Are we talking IP addresses from your connected TV? Are we talking direct mailers and so on? So like all the data is just super fragmented and spacious, right? And likewise, the data complexity. The part I'm going to talk about on the privacy landscape, so as part of the entity resolution platform, TU has integrated our identity resolution capabilities to bring our identity management, persistent keying, and other capabilities like data hygiene, data enrichment to your customer data, so that you don't ever have to send it to us. So like TransUnion can provide all the value of all of our services without ever seeing any customer data from our clients. And so that's really important. Like if you have 100 million customers, if in order to benefit from like the robust data capabilities for our customer 360, you have to send those 100 million records out to a data provider and back at least monthly. A, that gets expensive from the data transfer, but also B, again, data leakage, risk of privacy breaches, and so on. So to bring everything to your data instead is a big advantage. So just talking about like types of capabilities we can provide via our integration with the entity resolution capability. So just talking about some of these, so like for example, if you're running an AI model, wouldn't it be helpful to know that actually 97% of your customer records are legitimate people? I'll give an example where that was not the case. We had a food delivery company where it was really important to have accurate addresses because people wanted their food to show up in the right place. It was important to have a good phone number because you wanted the company to contact you in case of a problem. But the name data was ridiculous. It's like first name, Supreme Galactic Ruler, last name of the universe, or like who the F gives you my full name? Like this is none of your business. Like that was literally like, they were like, we didn't get a really good match rate on these records. I wonder why. It was like, well, can you send a copy of the data? And they're like, yeah, sure. We started to look and it was like literally curse words and nonsense and all that stuff. So yeah, is your model going to be based off of the supreme galactic ruler of the universe, or is it going to be based off of Ryan who lives at that address? So verification is important. Duplication is really important too. So sometimes duplication is a good thing. Like if you're that automotive company with 300 data records, 300 data repositories, high levels of duplication, that's great because we can actually see now all these different touch points with our customers across all these different data sets. Now I have a better, more robust lifetime value model. Awesome. Sometimes data duplication, not so good. So there was a CPG company who's like, well, we need to incentivize customers to give us their data because we don't have relationships with anybody. Like we sell through all the retailers. So let's compensate people for bringing more data to us. So they basically created this like referral scheme. Like if I referred a friend, I would get more points. And so there was one person in their database who referred themselves 4,700 times, all at the same address, all just different names like William, Wilhelmina, Bill, Billy, and then he ran out of bills and he turned to like all kinds of other crazy names, and it was like unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. So sometimes customer data is messy. I guess that's the point, right? So knowing what you're dealing with, getting it organized is important. And then the last part, phone numbers. Our phone numbers, y'all, now that we can transfer our phone numbers as we move, they're almost as durable as our social security numbers. Like that I'm gonna have the same phone number probably for the rest of my life. So that moves with me, and that's useful. So if you have additional customer phone numbers, that can help AI models. It's a more durable key off of which you can be building your AI models. So just kind of talk a little bit about like if you're working in the customer data space, what are some of the specific things that you could do? So first and foremost, I think it's important to like collect customer data wherever and however you can. Really important to proactively secure consent. Like we don't want to be going and snooping on consumers. We're all consumers ourselves, right? It doesn't feel good to be spied upon. But invite consumers to share their data and invite them to give consent to use that data for marketing purposes. It doesn't really matter how sparse the data is, because if you're working with an identity provider, we can help stitch the data together. Next, within your Google Cloud environment, then you have these 300 different data sets, right? Okay, how do we stitch all those together? So using the identity resolution capabilities we have, which include flexibility to identify consumers based on name, address, phone, email, IP address, device ID, and so on, to resolve that to an individual consumer. And then you can enrich that with demographics and other attributes as well, so you know more about your customers. I notice I'm tight on time, so I'll accelerate. Also, another big thing, like when we hear this all the time, that customers even want to collaborate with different divisions internally, like certain parts of a bank can't share data with another part, or media companies, same thing. Finding ways to collaborate across your own internal lines of business, that's important, but also for that Coke example, or a CPG company, we don't have great customer data. We want to work with a retailer. Cool, let's collaborate. Let's organize our data in such a way, key it, that we can understand and collaborate better between two parties. So the Google Clean Room in BigQuery is helpful for that, certainly. Our data, a collaboration is only as good as the overlap that you have between two customers. So, CPG company plus retailer, if you don't overlap at all, that's a meaningless collaboration, right? Whereas if you can find more overlap between your customers, the more valuable the collaboration is going to be. And so that's a role that TransUnion can play in maximizing the potential overlap and collaboration between two parties. I think we spoke about all the different channels, right? I think the important part here is as you think about like your individual data asset, your first party data, if you start collaborating with someone else, awesome, that's someone else's first party data. That becomes your second party data. Let's build audiences based off of that. Let's be more informed and more strategic. Let's reach the consumers where they are across all these different outlets and channels. And so by bringing the data to your Google Cloud environment, you're able to do things faster than you were before. Instead of having multiple days of data transferring from one place to another and back, plus like performance SLAs and all that stuff, query the data as you want, and it takes minutes instead of days. If you have the best AI models in the world, but they're based off of data that's 29 days old, like maybe you're not, or 6 months old, or whatever the case, right? You're not going to have the best model anymore. So let's sync the data freshness with the freshness of the model, for example. And then we also spoke about the no data movement and why that's so important. Just wanted to share a couple business outcomes to bring this to life a little bit. So a lot of this can feel a bit academic. That's why I try to give some examples like the person who's spoofing the loyalty system and so on. These are 3 specific customers of ours. If you think of a telco provider, they have a direct billing relationship with everyone within their database. So you'd think that they have really excellent customer data, but we're actually able to identify 55 million consumers from within a telco's first-party data set, so their own customers. We were able to identify that many of their customers because we knew who the individuals were associated with the phone, whereas they could only see the family plan, for example. So that was really meaningful for them. A top 5 retailer, they had so many transactions. They were trying to build a retail media network. They had so many transactions and such high duplication within their data set that it was really relevant for them to pull all the records together so that they could better monetize the data that they had and charge more for their retail media. And then the last one, if you've got the army of data scientists, right, that I spoke about before, and you actually have the data in a way that's consumable, you can use it in really clever ways. So it's like cost arbitrage. Instead of buying audiences off the shelf, let's create our own audience, which approximates that, but it's at our custom low cost compared to like an established audience, which is going to cost us more. So they saved over $100 million just by doing that. And there's a plug. So our products are available in Google Entity Resolution. We were actually I think we were the first, if not one of the first data providers in Google Analytics Lab when it was first introduced. And we've been close with Google ever since then. So we have a great relationship. Please, if you're curious, reach out. My friend and colleague, Michael Geller, was going to be here with me. He couldn't travel today, but his email is still on the slide. So it's like one of those when you're like, you give all the action items to the person out of the room, then this is Michael for you. So that's it. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time, everyone. Appreciate it.
Ryan, thank you very much. All right, folks. And I want to thank you for the wonderful demonstration of why data clean rooms matter, right? You all have some fairly sensitive data under the hood in your organizations. Being able to collaborate with your joint customers in a way that preserves, whether it's PII or other sensitive information, but still being able to augment and enrich is a really important thing. So now we've gotten to the point in the day where we've solved all of your data problems, right? Excellent. Today's already a win. All right, so I said it earlier, grounding matters, right? Data matters, facts matter, right? And it's a whole lot easier if you're at all familiar with the challenges of training LLMs and AI models and the like. Grounding makes your life a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot cheaper, and why a lot of this really matters. And so with that, I want to bring Nick Reed up from Moody's to talk a little bit about what's happening on his side of the world.
No problem, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name's Nick Reed. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Moody's. I'm an Englishman who grew up in Australia. I spent a couple of decades working in insurance and banking there. As my wife describes it, we moved to New York and spent 4 winters in New York working for Moody's. I now live in Southern California. I also need a hip replacement, so I'm just going to lean on this lectern for the next 20 minutes, if that's okay. Before we get going, I thought I'd just play you a quick video, and then we'll get into grounding.
how do you call in English from Donald Duck, DuckTales, the uncle, the rich uncle? Scrooge. You know this, when Scrooge McDuck dives into his gold coin swimming pool, that's how it feels to be able to play with Moody's data sets. Generative AI is actually very easy to grasp. With some prompts, just speak in English or Spanish or French or any other language, you can create something that creates a SWOT analysis in a company or a credit memo. So now you can do all these things, but PhD not needed anymore.
We're really interested in how we can leverage these kinds of tools to make us better, to make us faster, to make us more knowledgeable, to make us more efficient. And so we're really focused on trying to get tools and technologies in the hands of people that allow them to make those kinds of assessments.
This is a watershed cultural moment for this company. Our approach to 14,000 innovators means that this year we were committed to educating and upskilling every single person at this company. Nobody left behind.
We put the tools into the hands of everybody, and that was in their existing workflows. So we enabled them through Slack, through Teams, through a web interface to start playing around with Gen AI. So the Moody's Copilot is the foundation for the whole of the business to build solutions on top of. We also had the buy-in from our CEO, Rob Valber. People hearing him say, I want you to be 14,000 innovators. It was quite phenomenal, the impact that had on our business.
We know that our customers and the decision makers in the market that we serve really require faster insights, more comprehensive insights, and access to that information. So really being able to leverage the power of AI to produce those types of premier solutions that can better serve their needs is going to be really important for us.
It's making sure that we put at the fingertips our customers all the relevant content that Moody's had to offer on a certain topic. It's also making sure that clients are aware of all the connections, and that brings us to that topic of exponential risk. When you ask a question to Research Assistant, we're not only delivering an answer to the topic you answered, but what are the other interconnected things that you should be looking at?
But look, staying on the sidelines is simply not an option. The advancements in Gen AI provide opportunities to enhance our solutions and address risks in ways previously unattainable. We aren't just improving our analysis, we're also helping our customers stay ahead in their respective fields.
Sergio, who you saw at the start of that video, is the head of our generative intelligence unit engineering team. And I just thought it was a fascinating way to describe what we give to that team to be able to get us going on this Gen AI journey. Before we do, there's a little bit of history that's probably relevant. I had a conversation out in the hallway that said, Moody's, that's the credit ratings agency, right? Why are you here? And so it's worth just giving you a little bit of background about Moody's. And there's actually a parallel here to the topic of Gen AI. See if you can build this bridge. So it feels like a competition on who's the oldest company and who has the most amount of data. But let me take you back. So in the early 1900s, if you wanted to buy and sell stocks, you needed to be a member of the New York Stock Exchange. And the railroad companies at the time decided that they wanted to be able to raise more capital, and so they wanted more people to be able to buy and sell stocks. Except the only people that had access to information and data to choose which stocks were the people that were members of the New York Stock Exchange. And John Moody didn't think that was fair. And so what John Moody did was take all of the information that was discussed and used in those meetings at the New York Stock Exchange and wrote it all down. And he put it in books, and he became a door-to-door salesman, selling books to provide transparency and democratize markets so that people could make choices about how to invest their money in the stock market. Unfortunately, the books got really heavy, and so he had to come up with a way of making them lighter. And so he invented the rating scale. So the thing that you know today as rating scale was to make the books lighter so that he could sell more of them and give more access to people. And so for 100 years, Moody's has been providing transparency, access, and information to markets. That information is mostly financial. And so for 100 years, it was summarizing profit and loss statements and balance sheets and processing information to make determinations about creditworthiness. About 15 years ago, the people that were making those determinations started to notice that there were other types of impacts that were insightful to making determinations about the creditworthiness of something. And so that analysis has adapted and changed, and the information that's used by our credit ratings analysts has needed to adapt to a kind of changing risk environment. We now refer to that as exponential risk. And it's actually a pretty easy concept to understand, particularly post the supply chain impacts of COVID, for example. So if you know that there's a flood in a particular location in the US, and you know that there's a piece of machinery that's in that location, and that piece of machinery produces a good that becomes a good that someone else uses as part of their supply chain to be able to produce another good and sell it to someone else, that flood is particularly impactful to all of that supply chain. And so understanding extreme weather events or cyber risk events or the implications of political situations becomes important to be able to have a complete picture of risk. And so we're really focused on being able to pull all of those things together and work out what the correlation is, what the relationship is between those risks, and then expose that information to people to be able to make better decisions. That's the kind of nature of our business. So it's more than just the credit ratings agency. In fact, more than half the revenue of the company now comes from stuff outside of the credit ratings agency. So I just thought it would be useful to give you that kind of background. And so if you think about it, the ratings agency has access to and produces lots of information. That information fills up a whole bunch of databases. Those databases are used to inform the way in which we produce models and create content and create opinions. And that information is injected into software solutions and workflow solutions that banks and insurance companies and corporates use to be able to make decisions. And that kind of gets us to the data itself. So like everyone else, we have lots of information. That information is grouped together into those types of information that are used to be able to make these kinds of risk and opportunity decisions. And so it relates to entities. We have the world's largest and deepest database of entity information. That's kind of private company information. Something like 4,000 attributes are available for those entities. We have information on economies. We have information on securities. We have information on properties. All of that information is connected together in our underlying databases and leveraged for decision-making purposes. That becomes important when you talk about the ability to overlay on top of that data sets, Gen AI and prompting tools. Because our view is that there are some inherent problems with the way in which Gen AI has been deployed so far, and some inherent problems with the models. And I hope there isn't anyone from the DeepMind group here, but we're going to talk a little bit about those problems. I think most people are aware of the fact that the training data sets that are used for LLMs are out of date. Now, our view is that the training and the process of training will speed up, and so they'll become less and less outdated, but inherently there's a delay between the information that's used to be able to create an LLM and the ability for that LLM to be able to generate responses. It's also pretty important to understand that large language models aren't knowledge retrieval engines. They're language creation engines, and so they're not really even designed, even if they were up to date, to be used to be able to extract facts. There's also a lack of evidence directly inside the LLMs. This is becoming more and more important. We're seeing people focused on being able to provide citations, being able to provide a connection back to where the underlying fact came from, mostly by using RAG engines, but you can't do that directly in an LLM. Again, most of the implementations so far of generative technologies also allow them to be free. And so they tend to be compulsive text generators. They tend to provide more information than's necessary to be able to actually use it as part of a decision-making process. That kind of brings us to the broader topic of grounding. That word has a few different definitions in the market. In this context, we're talking about grounding responses, not grounding the model. To be able to do that well, you need to have an ability to connect your data sets. You need to have an ability, as we've heard already, to be able to resolve against some reference set, whether that's resolving against an entity or resolving against a property or resolving against a transaction. There's a requirement to understand the timeliness of that information. I think a previous speaker talked about the fact that there are updates to what feels like static reference data, and so knowing when that information was accurate and being able to track back the history of that piece of information becomes important when you're informing an LLM. Mostly, to be able to leverage generative technologies, you need to be able to tap into APIs to be able to access different data sets, different models, or different componentry. And importantly, there's a requirement to understand what you're allowed to access. This is particularly relevant for us because we have a vast set of data where the entitlements and permissions around each of the individual attributes might be different. And so being able to understand how to leverage that information when you're informing a response that's produced by an LLM is pretty important. Think about it in our context. If you're asking a Moody's built generative tool a question, the expectation that you have is that you're getting Moody's answer. And so that means Moody's complete answer. And so we have a requirement to be able to make sure that the answer that we provide has an ability to go into all of those different data assets to be able to provide the fact base around which to be able to create the answer and then to be able to cite back to the individual attribute that was used to be able to generate the response in the first place. We refer to those as RAG systems. They are inherently using grounding as a technique to be able to make sure that there's some basis of trust. What I can tell you is the conversations that we've had, particularly in financial services, is that there is a hesitancy to be able to use and leverage generative technologies, particularly in decision-making processes, if there isn't an ability to be able to track back, to trace, to connect to something that's accurate and recent and real. And so grounding is becoming the overarching way in which, again, particularly in financial services, companies are starting to say, I won't be able to enter these markets. I won't be able to start leveraging these tools and technologies unless I've got some basis around which to have kind of trust and accuracy in the responses themselves. There's a couple of minutes left. I was going to talk about our Gen AI journey. I actually thought it might be more interesting, if we can, just to see if there are any questions in the room about RAG, about grounding as a technique. Are people starting to leverage this? Are they starting to think about how they're going to connect their data assets, third-party data assets, and the techniques that their customers are asking to be able to provide some sense of accuracy and trust? Like I said, I can give you some insights into particularly the financial services world. But lots of the discussions we've had in the room have been about who's starting to get ready for grounded answers in Gen AI. There's one over there. I can repeat your question.
Are you on a question? Ready?
A lot of pressure. Hold on. Didn't want to drop it. Yeah, so I follow, I think her name is the Cloud Girl, Priyanka Vergadia. She's, I guess, kind of a SME for Google. But she was recently sharing some information about agentic workflows. So I was curious if that process kind of figures into this grounding or just anything that you guys do with AI just to make the data more accurate.
Yeah, in fact, I would say when you start talking about agentic workflows, grounding becomes more important because it's less likely to have some human oversight or some human checking the process. agentic is a word that I don't know that I'd necessarily used until a month ago. This is just the idea that you can build sophisticated systems where you're allowing agents to be able to make determinations about the work, the interpretation of outcomes that are required, rather than necessarily just using Gen AI in a kind of prompt and response type of way. Again, the experiments that we're undertaking, the work that we're doing, is really focused on being able to provide and produce grounded truth. So sometimes the agentic work is to be able to create data sets, which we then put into RAG engines, which then underpin the agent's ability to be able to create tasks and to fulfill some of their outcome work. So it's even more important.
There, I'm curious, step 4 of the slide here where it says API architecture, are there any other delivery mechanisms that Moody's is considering to make their data available for RAG workflows?
No problems. I guess the focus on API is because we're talking about a complete generative system that also involves needing to be able to leverage an LLM. When it comes to just being able to access the data, it kind of depends on where you're looking to build those systems. Again, the conversations that we've had with Google is about making our data available in a grounding service, like a data marketplace, so other people can build Gen AI applications on top of it. If you're looking to do that in-house, then you need to be able to make sure that you can either call an API or you have an ability to access the data. It doesn't have to be via API, but we're finding the complete system requires some API connections because mostly people want to be able to call out to different LLMs to be able to leverage the compute of the LLM itself.
In the world of third-party data providing in general, you always have like deterministic data or model data. So the value of the data you actually make available kind of depends on its quality. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, with that system, number one, how do you offer some type of flexibility in the number of chunks you retrieve and the type of accuracy of the RAG pipeline itself? And number two, I'm really curious about like the type of commercials you associate with that.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of different answers. We like the idea of saying, how do we make our data as available as possible and not limit it to particular workflows or particular use cases. And that's a complicated thing to do because depending on the workflow, you might have different requirements of the accuracy of the underlying information. Again, part of the grounding service that Google is building will give you insight into the use cases, the accuracy, the timeliness, as part of the grounding service itself so that you can then make determinations about the deterministic nature of the data and your ability to use it in decision-making processes. So our approach is to make it available rather than necessarily predetermine what it might be leveraged for from a use case perspective. In terms of the commercials, I think it's fair to say, and Google will say, that's actually a pretty interesting industry question, which is how do you make information available so that it can be leveraged to inform the intent of a response without necessarily being leveraged as a kind of discrete attribute inside a decision-making process. Again, our view so far is we would like to drive and stimulate use of information as a way of underpinning the accuracy, recency, and availability of the information. And that if that drives usage, then at some point in time, there's an ability to commercialize that. But we're less concerned about defining the discretion of the commercials today and more interested in saying, we like the idea of adoption. We think our information is valuable. We think these tools are valuable to be able to drive decision-making processes. So we're really focused on saying, what are the barriers to entry to adoption? And one of those barriers today is accuracy and certainty and an ability to be able to access grounded truth. And so grounding systems in general are a mechanism that the industry is using to be able to drive adoption of this stuff kind of in production. Everyone in this room, I imagine, has probably done some level of experimentation. Experimentation is pretty different than being able to say, I'm going to use generative technologies to actually decide who to lend money to or how to price an insurance contract. I think we're out of time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nick. And if I can reinforce Nick's point there for a quick second, I helped build a couple of search engines much earlier in my career, and one of the things that I learned through all of the data aggregation and entity resolution and augmentation of data sets is you still end up with foundational data sets that are frankly never going to go away, and no different than building a house or a skyscraper. That initial foundation is critical, and getting that right, and you don't get to walk away from it. Like, you can't have a house without a foundation. You can't have a real data strategy without those critical data sets to drive it forward. So we're going to move to the last speaker of the day, and I'm going to just make one more quick comment here. It's been interesting. We spent a bunch of time talking about both marketing use cases and financial data use cases, lots of conversations around structured data and unstructured data and the importance of facts. And I talked about this earlier, but just to ground everyone here, IP matters as well, brand safety matters. And when you're operating in a world where you can't quickly just say 1 + 1 = 2 to validate the output, you really need to understand where your data is coming from and that provenance. And so with that, I would like to bring Carl from Shutterstock to the stage to talk a little bit about what the folks at Shutterstock are doing.
All right. All right. Good morning, New York City. Quickly want to thank our friends from Google for having us out today, and all of you for making the journey in, especially those who braved the subway this morning. As a colleague mentioned, I'm the last thing standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to briefly get through this. But my name's Carl Burkhardt. I head up data and AI marketplace partnerships at Shutterstock. And today I'm here to talk to you about how our data is powering and enhancing AI use cases. Before I get into the nitty gritty, I thought it'd be helpful to give you a bit of background on Shutterstock and how we got into the data space. And so most people know us as a 20-year-old provider of stock photography. And over time, we've made quite a few acquisitions that have helped us become the largest stock provider in the world. And that includes Big Stock, putting us in even deeper into the image space, Premium Beat into the audio space, Turbo Squid, which gives us the largest 3D library in the world, Pond 5, making us the largest video provider in the world, and Envato, which recently put us deeper into the template space. All of those things being said, we're only 3 years into our data journey. That began back in 2021 with licensing of small image deals, mostly for machine learning purposes. Move into 2022, and we started to expand into multimodal use cases, and that included audio, image, and video. Coming into 2023, the explosion of generative AI, we saw huge demand for our entire corpus, so licensing our entire library to large hyperscalers who are building generative models. Moving into 2024, we've started now partnering with AI startups and Google and data marketplaces, which includes Google Cloud Marketplace. Our data being available through Google Cloud, where 70% of all Gen AI companies build, makes us the only provider of such data on GCP today. And so whether you're building machine learning models or pushing the boundaries of generative AI, you need high quality data that you can trust. Today, the demand for detail-rich metadata has never been higher. And unfortunately, poor quality metadata is still out there. Incomplete, inaccurate data sets lead to biased models or poor performance. Labeling data yourself can be timely or cost-consuming, not to mention labor-intensive. And options for data sets are so broad and generic that it can feel impossible to get what you need. Most open source data sets don't have high quality resolution images, which drags down the overall quality. Illegal or improperly procured data can expose your organization to legal action, which we've definitely seen in the generative AI space. All that being said, Shutterstock's ethically sourced high quality data is ready to complement Google Cloud's suite of AI and machine learning products. And so a little bit about our library. Shutterstock is home to over 750 million images, videos, audio tracks, and 3D assets. Our library is unmatched in quality and breadth of content, and it's all ethically sourced from a global network of contributors in over 150 countries. Images, we have over 600 million images with 50 million added annually. That means we get about 1 million images a week. We have over 50 million videos with 5 million added annually. We have 3.5 million audio files with roughly 500,000 added every year. And we have 1.3 million 3D models with over 100,000 added annually. Adding new content on a daily basis to our marketplace makes us grow at an even more substantial rate. And the reason that you want to be able to continue refresh models with this refresh data from us on a quarterly or annual basis is so you can continue to fuel the freshest, most current models being developed in this space. If you think about this, this could be things in fashion, automotive, pop culture. But all that said, we continue to license our data and fuel it to the entire space. Connecting pieces of metadata to Shutterstock's 700 million plus asset library allows for infinite possibilities to slice data horizontally and vertically. Our metadata is powered through intelligent data entry, premium points of reference, and detailed tags and categories. So what does this mean for customers? Customers have options when they're acquiring data from Shutterstock. Standard data includes things like descriptions and keywords. But if customers want to buy premium metadata, they get access to things like model releases with data points such as age, gender, and ethnicity. If they want to buy premium metadata, they can get things like contributor country, categories, format, height, width, and even description translations. We can translate our metadata into other languages for international customers. And we're continuing to scale and enhance our library through that organic library growth from our contributor base and strategic library acquisitions across all categories. We're creating new data with access to our studio production team who can create custom content curation. Or we can leverage access to our contributor base to bring in new content requests. We're also enriching our data by integrating new solutions to improve and enhance metadata. That includes bringing image to text, generative back to add to our metadata, or adding human labeling services to bring from characters, say, 200 characters per metadata to 1,000 characters per metadata. At the end of the day, we're unlocking new possibilities with our data, and that's just the beginning. So most people know traditional model training, right? Foundational models built on large data sets for foundational use cases. But what we're seeing more and more is a need for fine-tuning. And so Shutterstock can deploy curated data sets tailored to specific use cases and applications across industries. Think of an enterprise brand who wants to put out marketing generative. Well, they can build on top of a foundational model that's ethically sourced, bring their brand content into that model, and then they can license specific curated data sets from Shutterstock to really create a style that meets their brand guidelines. So generative AI, most people know image generative. Shutterstock has licensed its data to power every major image generator out there, including Google Imagine. But the possibilities are really expanding with all of our data types. And so right now, our video is being put into image to video and text to video models being leveraged in the entertainment space. Our 3D assets are being developed with text to 3D and image to 3D models from gaming and manufacturing customers. And then audio. Right now, one customer recently used our sound effects library to build a text to sound effects model. And so that being said, all of our content type can be used to build generative models. But that's only the beginning. And we think there's a lot of niche use cases that are going to become more common in this space. One of those being facial detection. So images and videos of people to build facial detection models. All of our images contain biometric model releases that provide permission to extract PII data. So we have these model releases from our contributors that say, great, you can use my likeness and my face to develop a machine learning model. Customer use case, one customer recently leveraged biometric data of children to teenagers aged 1 to 20 to enrich an age detection model that needed to be highly accurate. People and object detection are other examples, right? So like machine learning models that can recognize and detect people in various settings and poses. That could include a mix of indoor and outdoor settings with multiple objects displayed, anything from food to furniture to clothes and vehicles. And this will have a huge impact in things like security applications, vehicle, home automation, retail, and industrial. And then content moderation, brand safety. Peter mentioned this. Content safety is core for Shutterstock. Ensuring positive user experiences while adhering to ethical standards is a part of our DNA. Shutterstock's strict quality standards mean we review images with auditing tools and manual quality checks as they come into our library. Content is moderated for nudity, violence, drugs, guns, and other not safe for work content. On top of that, Shutterstock also moderates trademarked and branded content, thus ensuring that models don't infringe on copyrights. So what does this mean? You can take this data and actually put it into the inverse. You can train machine learning models that moderate content. And this was actually one of our first data deals. A customer took our data and built a machine learning model to moderate content on a phone operating system. So as you can imagine, not having the wrong images pop up on your phone at the wrong time is an extremely valuable use case for an operating system. And that being said, kind of bringing it full circle, ethical, responsible, and compliant AI is a core value for Shutterstock. Because our data is ethically sourced, because we're leading the world by contributing to the first contributor fund, so that means every time we license our data for generative or machine learning purposes, our contributors are compensated on the other end. We're now providing generative AI to our customers on Shutterstock.com by leveraging Google Imagine, because we know that that model's been sourced and built in an ethical manner. We're also providing legal indemnification and protection through generative AI. So the same kind of indemnification and legal protection that we offer our customers on our stock, we're now offering through generative because we know where it's being sourced and built from. We're also building trust in this quickly evolving landscape, which brings us back to Vertex AI. And so I want to touch on how this can be leveraged within the GCP ecosystem. Building refined tools requires precise and detail-rich metadata. As a partner on the Google Cloud Marketplace, we can design a data set to meet your needs. Your Google Cloud Compute and AI infrastructure, coupled with Shutterstock's rich library, you won't be limited. And with Google providing all-in-one data solutions for use in AI and machine learning applications, you'll be set. So I'll let Peter touch on this in a little bit more detail. But in addition, this is kind of like our plug slide as well. So we'd love to learn more about your use cases. And if you're interested, please get in touch.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah. So to put a finer point on how all of this works, and I think the Shutterstock example is really interesting here because it's one thing to just share a table or a whole set of tables of data. When you're talking about sharing all sorts of complex media imagery and information and foundational sort of constructs to drive models, what's really interesting about what can be done with Shutterstock, and this takes it one level further, it can just as easily be done with Moody's and with LSEG and with everyone else, is with the foundational data that we're talking about here, you can start to train models extremely quickly using BigQuery. All right. But once you have that model trained in BigQuery, and you can prototype it and whatnot, you can then externalize it into Vertex, right? And you can start to run larger scale training. You can start running what we haven't talked about today, and this is a lot of complexity, not worth getting into in depth, but things like ML operations. You've trained a model, right? What happens when you've got version 2 of that model, right? Version 3 of that model. Is version 2 and version 3 actually better? How are you going to run back tests, right? How are you going to handle version control? All of that stuff is a solved problem, right? We provide a lot of the services and the tooling to go make that happen. But then on top of that, what happens when you actually want to run all sorts of predictions and analysis and you want to do it at scale, right? Do you want to do it on batch? Do you want to do it in streaming? All of these solutions get tied together. And so as you're thinking about the world of where you're trying to get to, right? Whether it's with Moody's, right, done in Bradstreet, or with LSEG, and you've got all sorts of financial markets data and all sorts of insurance markets data and all sorts of real estate and commercial data, or it's with folks like Shutterstock or Choreograph around the marketing landscape, right, or with TransUnion. We've got solutions across the board. And so with that, Carl, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And if I can have the clicker, the other powerful part. Thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone here today. I hope today has been informative and interesting and maybe a little mind expanding. I hope it's brought you some ideas. I hope it's brought you a lot of questions. Right? And I just want to say in closing, one of the things that I love about working with Google, or at Google, and working with all of you, is that we love problems. We love hard problems. We love collaborating with you on those hard problems. So please, feedback is a gift. We'd love your feedback. If you have questions, if you have problems, if you have challenges, come find me, find Dom, find Stephen, find anyone else here from Google, and bring them to us, because we love to hear them. And we're going to sit down and we're going to go figure them out together. With that, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.